Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what a fascinating subject we have before us tonight. I think rarely in the time that I've covered public policy at The Economist for many years and also just been interested and active in broadcast media has the subject of the future of broadcast media and in particular the BBC been so high on the agenda. We're particularly fortunate to have Chris Bryant with us tonight to give us the view from the other side of the House, but a view which will also help to drive the argument.
I don't think anybody can really be in any doubt now that the BBC is under siege. It started the day after the general election when you might have seen the Daily Express headline made this very clear. The BBC must now pay the price for its blatant anti-conservative bias. Then the Chancellor raided the BBC coffers to pay for the government policy of free television licences for the over 75s in exchange for the promise of a possible CPI increase in the licence fee from 2017. But with Javid, Osborne and Whittingdale each taking chunks out of the BBC, it is all the more important that we remind them that they do not carry the nation with them for this bully crusade. And we should look to the future. With fixed-term parliaments, we should consider an 11-year charter rather than a 10-year charter this time to take the next renewal out of the heat of general election battle and well beyond the 2025 election. The BBC is the cornerstone of our creative industries in this country. And the creative industries, in turn, are not just a pleasant added extra to our economy, a luxury, if you would like. They are the powerhouse of our future prosperity. They represent 1 in 11 jobs now. A year ago, we were saying it was 1 in 12 jobs. The golden thread that runs through the BBC is that everyone gets something out of it because everybody's paid for it. Popular programming is what justifies the licence fee to the vast majority of my constituents. A universal service that binds the nation together, the BBC can remain, I think, our cultural NHS. I don't think there's anyone now who really believes that the governance structure of the BBC is fit for purpose. I would argue that the events of the last 2 weeks, when the Chancellor mounted a stick-up raid on the Director General and the Chair of the Trust, prove the point. There was nobody independent enough of the BBC or of the government who was prepared to issue a single word of dissent in public. I suggest the BBC needs a proper unitary executive board with a non-executive chair and a majority of non-executive directors who should be appointed for a fixed period so that they retain their independence. The BBC, I believe, should now be fully subject to the National Audit Office. This leaves the question of regulation. I would far prefer to see the full regulatory role adopted by Ofcom. Let's be clear, if the Cameron, Osborne, Javid, Whittingdale aim is to cut the BBC down to size, they do not carry the nation with them in this particular bully crusade. And frankly, I will fight them every inch of the way. I hope you will too. We have just 18 months. Thanks very much.
We were joking before that the Trust itself said today more needs to be done on diversity and women and ethnic minorities, to which my response was frankly, oh, is it that time of year again? I mean, this comes round and round.
The truth is, our broadcasting industry in this country and the whole wider media needs, if it's going to find new audiences, if it's going to if it's going to have a strong commercial success in the future, it's going to have to change the on-screen and behind-screen set of faces.
You were critical about the Trust, and I think you said explicitly, and it was very strongly phrased, that basically they should have known better because they'd been through 2010, the sort of shotgun at dawn. And does that mean you think that Rona Fairhead isn't doing a good enough job at the head of the Trust?
I've met Rona once. I like her. I think she's very intelligent and clever. I think I would never want to have that job myself, because you're always in a permanent double bind. You're either lip-syncing the Director General or you're undermining the Director General. And that just is no way to run a business. That ain't no way to treat your auntie.
But I suppose your point was the Trust should have seen this coming and been on the front foot. Is that what I'm
Indeed. And yes, and if I'd been on the Trust, or if I'd been at the chair, I would have taken the whole Trust with me and said, I'm sorry, this is no way to behave. This is my red line. I'm sorry, you just can't treat the BBC this way. You cannot turn the BBC into a subsidiary of the Department for Work and Pensions. Frankly, I'm mystified that the whole of the trust didn't resign.
What to your mind is the role and what's the story going forward really for the commercial public service broadcasters?
I was very anxious a few years ago that ITV seemed to be going down the route of wanting to ditch as much of its public service remit as possible. And my anxiety about that was, if ITV didn't do regional news and current affairs, I just didn't think it would feel like it was belonging to us. It was that it had a kind of national role anymore. And in the end, that would diminish people's interest in the other programming, the more commercially viable programming that they had.
Okay, I'm going to shut up. Gentleman in the aisle.
Who benefits from a weakened, submissive BBC politically?
Those people who don't believe in it, most of whom are, well, the loudest voices against the BBC are a certain section of the British press, some of whom are owned by people who have commercial interests, in particular Rupert Murdoch.
Why is it that I'm being asked to cross-subsidise over 75s?
Because we believed that we had to address pensioner poverty.
My name's Richard Eyre and I'm a BBC trustee. If you look back, Chris very properly accepted that it was a Labour government that introduced free TV licences for the over 75s, but coupled it with a direct grant to the BBC to cover the cost. Actually, that was the fatal decision, for the BBC to accept direct funding from government for its licence fee funded services. It should have been apparent to the BBC at that time that a government one day would come along and say, you keep the obligation, but the money is no longer available from the taxpayer.
But the problem is, because what happened this time is exactly the same process as happened in 2010, I think it proves that the BBC Trust structure and governance is not fit for purpose.
Chris, thank you very much for allowing yourself to be squeezed dry here, and particularly with these great questions from the audience to really sort of push you on your thinking. Very generous of you to spare the time, and also thank you all for coming and for prodding us along and giving us such a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.